would like to hear from you, Professor Ahmed Susan. You have been seeing this issue from different perspectives because you have been both a member of one of the delegations and you have been a peace activist at the same time, and you also are an academic who sees this, and I know that your institute also does a lot of polling and brings evidence into the debate. So how was that? If you heard now the experience from Northern Ireland, so what happened in Cyprus that sort of the Yes campaign could not convince on all sides, basically everybody?
Thank you very much, Tanya. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, IPTI and the Colombian Mission to UN here, for inviting me here. I hope that my presentation on Cyprus, even if there is slightest contribution to the plebiscite in Colombia, I would be really very happy. I will start with a very short background information on the Cyprus issue, and then I'll talk about the campaign on both sides of the UN divide in Cyprus, as well as the consequences of the votes on the two referendums or the referenda in Cyprus. Well, the Cyprus conflict has first came to the UN agenda in the mid-50s, when it was clear that the British colony would end. What's going to happen in Cyprus. So it came as a debate on self-determination of Cyprus, or rather the two communities living in Cyprus, the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. In 1960, Cyprus got independence, or as some call it, semi-independence from UK. A Republic of Cyprus was established by international treaties. There were three guarantors of this Republic of Cyprus, UK as the former colonial master, Turkey and Greece, also known as the motherlands of the respective communities. Some call this 1960 Republic of Cyprus a functional federation. Some called it a consociational democracy, whereas the functions of the state were shared or divided between the two communities. However, for various different reasons, I'm not going to get into that. In 1963, we had a constitutional crisis and the eruption of ethnic violence in Cyprus. In 1974, UN peacekeeping force came to Cyprus, stationed in Cyprus, and they are still in Cyprus, so it is one of the oldest missions of the UN there. In 1974, another important year, there was a Greek coup and a subsequent Turkish military operation. The island got divided into two parts, north and south. And since then, the two sides have been trying to unify the country, to solve the Cyprus problem, based on a federal state that will be bi-communal with regard to the constitutional aspects, and it will be bizonal with regard to the territorial aspects. After long years of what we call inter-communal negotiations, meaning negotiations between the two communities, by the way, it started the year I was born, back in 1968 in Beirut, and then the negotiations were transferred to Nicosia. The idea was to come up with a mutually agreed solution between the two communities. One of the latest important turning point was back in 2004, when the two sides managed, with the help of United Nations, at the end the UN played the role of filling up the remaining gaps between the two sides. Here in Bürgenstock in Switzerland, the two sides agreed on a comprehensive solution with the help of the UN, and that solution was put to simultaneous separate referenda in Cyprus in 2004, exactly about 1 month after it was finalized here in Bürgenstock. But it was the fifth version of the plan, because the previous versions of the plan came out about 1.5 years before. So people had the chance to read different versions of the plan. Now, in 2004, in the campaign, while the plan was supported by 2/3 of the Turkish Cypriots, who exactly voted 65% yes to the plan, it was rejected by a 3/4 majority by the Greek Cypriot side. Exactly 76% said no to the plan.
So Ahmed, just to understand
Yeah.
this from our for the non-Cyprus experts, that means we are talking actually about two different sort of
Exactly.
referendums in the two sides, plus two different yes and no campaigns.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm going to come into that. There was separate simultaneous referenda taking place at the same time, one in the northern part of Cyprus and the one in the southern part of Cyprus, for Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. During the campaign, of course, each community on both sides of the UN divide was further divided by these yes and no camps. There was a very strong and widespread no camp, and a weak yes camp in the Greek Cypriot community, simply because majority of the main parties were supporting the no vote. Only one party, major party called DC, which is a liberal conservative party, partly supported it, although it openly supported it, but some of its followers did not vote yes in the referendum. That's why they had 24%, because DC is a party that has 1/3 of the vote in the Greek Cypriot side. The leader of the Greek Cypriots, the President Tassos Papadopoulos himself, was an adamant supporter of no. In the Turkish Cypriot community, there was a strong no, but at the same time, a very strong yes campaign. Most of the left-wing parties in the Turkish Cypriot community supported the yes camp, supported the solution, while the right-wing parties were voted against it. And this campaign, the no side, was also headed by the strong then Turkish Cypriot leader, Mr. Rauf Denktaş. So there was symmetry there. Both leaders at that time were against the plan. But I have to make a point here. There is a very significant difference in terms of the political structure of the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots on the island. In the Greek Cypriot community, the political space is occupied predominantly by the political parties. So we do not have a significant civil society independent from the political parties. Even the unions are pretty much linked to the political parties. Whereas in the northern part of Cyprus, in the Turkish Cypriot community, there is a very strong and a vibrant civil society independent from the political parties. For example, the teachers' union, both elementary school and secondary school teacher unions, and they are in thousands, very strong. They are completely independent from political parties, and they formed some of the most active members of the Yes campaign. In fact, in early 2000s, there was a movement in the Turkish Cypriot community called "This Country is Ours," which was formed by several dozen NGOs and political parties who were claiming that we have to rule our land independent from being dominated by the Greek Cypriot neighbors, as well as independent from being influenced by Turkey, the motherland. So there was this very active platform for that. When you look at the demographics, in terms of the demographics of the voters, among the 65% of the Turkish Cypriots who voted yes, 80+% of them were young people. That means below 45 years old. So there was a very strong support by the new generation in the Turkish Cypriots. Whereas the picture was completely the opposite in the Greek Cypriot community. Among the 24% who voted yes were basically the old generation who had the experience of living together with the Turkish Cypriots. Whereas the majority of the young people among the Greek Cypriots voted no. Now, it is also revealed in our island-wide public opinion polls that I have been conducting with my Greek Cypriot research fellows since 2008-2009, that in the Turkish Cypriot society, the more educated people are, the more likely they are to vote yes. The picture is just the opposite on the Greek Cypriot side. The more time people spend in schools, the more likely they are going to vote no to a peace plan. I think this tells a lot about the nature of the education that people have to go through. During the campaign, the whole thing in both Greek and Turkish Cypriot leadership by Mr. Tassos Papadopoulos and Mr. Denktaş were presented to the public in a give and take way, meaning that whatever we are going to get is whatever they are going to lose, or whatever they are going to lose is whatever we are going to get. So it's a very classical sort of Cold War competitive mentality, whereas in the yes camp, both in the Turkish and Greek Cypriot society, the peace plan, which was called the Annan plan at that time, taking its name from Kofi Annan, was presented to people as a win-win situation, a case where both sides wins. The no camp on both sides tried to appeal to the fears of people and focusing mostly on the past and presenting the past as problematic, dysfunctional, full of constitutional crisis and violence and whatnot. Whereas in the yes camp on both sides, the campaigners tried to appeal to the hopes of people, and it was more future-oriented. That they were saying, okay, past, we're not denying it. We have to learn from our mistakes in the past, but we have to look forward to the future. But of course, what was missing that we now debate nowadays in the negotiations is this joint communication strategy between the two sides to have a joint campaign. This never took place. All right? In fact, the leaders themselves who negotiated later became the champions of their no campaign. When we look at the consequences, we need to understand that the referenda in Cyprus were not for democratic principles. The referenda in Cyprus was designed by the United Nations in order to bypass the then Turkish Cypriot leader Rauf Denktaş, because the UN had that belief at that time that he was the only obstacle in front of the plan, and that the Turkish Cypriots were more progressive than their leader, and the only way to bypass him was to install a referendum into the process. In fact, it was proved at the end that he was not the only one, that the Greek Cypriot leader was also very adamant against the plan. But what happened was separate simultaneous referenda, the principle of that remained as we speak today, that it is now a principle that when the two leaders who are negotiating will come up with a plan, it will be put to simultaneous separate referenda, meaning that the Greek and the Turkish Cypriots have to approve it at the same time. The referenda in 2004, in my opinion, meant separate exercise of right of self-determination. Not in the classical sense of right to statehood, but in a more modern sense, the right to participate into the governance of the future common state by each respective community. So what were the consequences of the voting in the referenda in Cyprus? For some people, the Annan plan, which was this 182-something pages long plan, its weakness was that it failed to indicate the consequences of the three scenarios of the four possible scenarios of the referendum. What are the possible scenarios? This four? Yes, 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 no, no, yes, and no, no, right? So we know that if there is yes, yes, what would happen? Well, there would have been the establishment of a federal Cyprus, which would be a European Union member.
So, but this didn't happen. So basically...
But what about the cases of yes, no,
but
no,
what
yes,
was
and no, no?
So what was the consequence of the situation that was there for Cyprus?
Well, the plan itself stated it, in it. It says that if the plan was not approved by both sides, meaning if we don't get a yes, yes, the plan would be null and void. Null and void. That's what the plan says. And I was always wondering, what does that mean? And it always comes to my mind. I liken this to, remember this, there is this movie called Mission Impossible? When Tom Cruise, the agent, first receives the message, and it says, once the message is done, it's going to self-destruct. Well, the plan destructed itself, was what happened. But of course, there are political consequences, all right? So what happened was the Turkish Cypriots got more sympathy in the international world at the beginning. The Greek Cypriots lost some credit, but then they restored it back and da-da-da-da. Okay, fine. But you know what happened? Since then, we lost 12 years plus and counting. So, you know, usually what happens is that you lost a lot of time, and you know what? The status quo. You think that it remains, but it does not. Now, for example, there are new buildings on the disputed property, changing demographics of the islands, and things of that sort, which I liken this to, you know, the snowball, when it is falling from the top of the mountain, it gets bigger and bigger. So by the time that the Cyprus problem remains unresolved, there are new layers of problems and clashes added to the Cyprus problem, so it becomes much bigger. And solving it today, tomorrow, or years later will be much more difficult. So
thank you.
The moral of the story, you lost a lot of time.
And I think the difference maybe is between Cyprus and Colombia, that Colombia doesn't have the luxury of a permanent peacekeeping mission that sits there and protects everybody. And so the consequences might be
also
different.
to go with the flow, as it were. So,
Thank you. So, Professor Susan, before, what is it what you would like to give Colombia on its way?
Don't lose time. That's number one. I start with an anecdote. Back in 1994, 20-something years ago, I was a very young person. I was part of this expert group of the UN who is trying to implement confidence-building measures in Cyprus. Something like opening a joint airport between the two sides, opening up a free zone between the two sides and whatnot. I saw 20-something years ago how that exercise was politicized by both sides and flushed down the toilet. And I could not help but to think that, if we managed to do those things 22 years ago, we would be talking about a different Cyprus today. But look, even if we manage to establish, well, first of all, come up with a comprehensive solution, that's the beginning of a big and arduous journey, because peace comes later. It's the people who make peace. Okay, the leaders, they make the deal, but it's the people where we should start from the education system and all socialization and whatnot to establish the seeds of peace. I once wrote in one of the academic articles that if we manage to establish a federation in Cyprus, I call it Belgianization of Cyprus. And a lot of people say, oh, Professor, you got it wrong. Belgium is not a good federation model and all that. I said, don't insult my, intelligence. I've been to Belgium many times and whatnot. But remember, in Belgium, several years ago, there were elections, and more than 400 days, they couldn't establish the government. And I asked the question, what happened to Belgium? I think the answer is very telling. Nothing. And I said, isn't this great? Because the alternative, what we went through in the past was, due to our differences, we killed ourselves, we killed one another, and we hurt one another. So, the extreme alternative of Belgianization is what I, again, invented the term Syrianization. And, I prefer Belgianization to Syrianization. At least we know that it's going to be a difficult to run federation, but nonetheless, whenever we have difficulties, we'll accept our difficulties and we'll move on. So don't lose time and start implementing as soon as possible.
Thank you. So if I would sum up what we have learned for either going for no or yes. So